All right. Hello, everyone. Huge apologies for the delay. We were sorting some things out on our end, but we're going to go ahead and dive right in. Thank you so much for your patience, Colleen, working on developing that. I hope that everyone else is too. That was a test. That's how we're starting these now. We're helping everyone develop patience. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. You are here today to join us, Team Lulu, to learn about editing at every level. So just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. If you have questions, I see that many of you have found the chat. Go ahead and drop them in there. And so if you have any questions throughout, drop them in. And then at the end of the presentation, we will go through and answer all of those that we can. And we'll just go through, introduce ourselves, introduce Lulu, and then get into some editing tips. So let's start this presentation. Next slide. All right, who are we? We are Lulu. Good one, Charlie. We're Lulu. So we are a real word. Lulu is a real word. It means remarkable person, object, or idea. We were founded in 2002 by Bob Young. Our platform is free to use. So if you're unfamiliar with Lulu, you can come to our platform, publish your work, and only pay when you want to buy print copies of your book. We published over 1 million books since being founded and paid out over $107 million in author revenues, which is such a staggering number. I always feel like I'm reading it wrong. So our mission statement is that we are dedicated to making the world a better place, one book at a time, through sustainable practices, innovative print-on-demand products, and a commitment to excellent service. Let's move along, please. A little more about us. So we are also a certified B Corporation. So if you're not familiar with B Corporations, I would highly recommend that you check them out. It's a wonderful community of companies that are for profit, but are interested in trying to improve the world through environmental performance, accountability, and transparency. So again, if you're not familiar, please check them out. We're proud to be one, and I think have been since 2017. And I always just like to share that. So moving right along, this is us, sort of. So I am here. Lauren is here. Anna Marie is here helping with chat. Paul Hobday, unfortunately, is sick today. So this is what he looks like when he's not sick. But Lauren has very graciously offered to go through the section that he prepared. And I'll leave it up to her whether she decides to do it in his voice or not. So I'm Chelsea. I'm the brand engagement manager. Lauren, I don't know if you want to do a little intro.
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Lauren. I'm the social media manager.
Yes. All right. So I will go ahead and get this started. Okay, so we're going to talk about editing today. And what I want to start with is self-editing. So this is obviously something, yeah, thanks. Yeah, so that was obviously a lot of words that are misspelled. But, you know, before I talk about what self-editing is and how you can do it, I just wanted to share this quote from David Sedaris. So he has a great masterclass. I would recommend anyone who's interested in writing, you know, especially anecdotal or humor pieces. He has a wonderful class on that. And I really love this quote, and I wanted to include it in this conversation because I thought, you know, someone as stellar as David Sedaris is still going through the self-editing process, and it's something that I didn't really realize. And so he says, you need to do the best that you can do, and then you need to take the best that you can do, and you need to rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it and rewrite it. So I think that's a really great quote, and I was surprised to hear him say that for his work, he usually edits, 17 or 18 times. And again, he's writing short stories, so you may think, wow, that's a lot of going through something that's really, you know, not a novel and typically kind of short snippets. But I really like this sentiment because I think it's so valuable to go through and do your best and then rewrite it before handing it off to an editor, because you're going to be able to get so much more from the editing process, from the professional editing process. So you're going to be able to save yourself time and money by doing that. And so I wanted to kind of start with this quote to kind of help us understand that no matter where you are, whether you're first starting out or whether you reached the levels of success that David Sedaris has, the self-editing is still such a crucial part of the process. So now we can go into 6 steps or tips for self-editing. So a little Michael Scott meme in here. I know that can be intimidating when you're thinking, how can I edit my own work? So hopefully when I go through these, you will have a better understanding and a better idea of how to do that. So up first, take a break. That's good news, right? That's exciting. So what you want to do once you've written the piece is take a step back from it and go ahead and take a break. When you try to edit immediately, it can be very difficult. You know, you're very close to this text. It's still fresh. So it might be hard for you to take a step back and separate yourself enough to see things that maybe aren't really serving the story. So a little tip here is that while you're taking a break, outline the story, outline what you want to see, outline the way you want the pace to go, outline what you're hoping the characters will do to advance the plot. And so while you're in this break period and you're kind of drafting your outline, that's a great way to use that to kind of go back to the story when you've given it, you know, a month, a week, however long you want. And then you can use this outline to make sure everything is really lining up with what you have in mind when you go back to the text. So this is sort of the, you know, write drunk, edit sober kind of thought process. But basically, you just want to be in a different mindset when you're editing than when you're writing. So it's really helpful to take a break from the text. The second one is trim the fat. So again, you know, this is once you have that outline, your handy dandy outline that you created, it's time to cut out everything that doesn't advance the plot or move you closer to your overall goal. This is also a good time to look out for inconsistencies or scenes that might not make sense anymore. So we all know that it can be very hard to cut things out that you've worked so hard on. But remember, you know, all writers write bad lines. They just take them out before they publish. So, you know, just because you're seeing things that you may have liked or maybe you're realizing aren't a good fit for this story, it's okay to take them out and you can always use them later. So tip number 3 is change the format. So Paul, again, you know, who is not with us today, unfortunately, wrote a really great blog post on creating an editing copy. And that's really what I'm talking about here. So although this could be achieved through a text-to-speech app or any other method that you know of that gives you a new perspective, changing the format, making the font bigger, you know, putting it in a different size or printing it out, all of these can work really well in helping you see the text in a new way and highlight things that maybe you weren't seeing when you're just reading it off of the screen that you wrote it on. All right, number 4 is read it out loud. So again, this really kind of goes hand in hand with changing the format, but reading your story out loud will help you identify spelling and grammar mistakes, as well as awkward phrasing. So when you read things silently, your brain tends to gloss over those spelling mistakes and grammar mistakes, especially if you're really familiar with the text. But when you read it out loud, it's much harder to kind of skim over any errors in the spelling, grammar things, weird wording, awkward phrasing, things like that. So reading it out loud can really help you, especially with things like dialogue and conversation in your text. Reading it out loud can be fantastic to highlight those trouble spots or any issues that may come up. Number 5, be ruthless. So again, kill those darlings. It can be hard, but when it's time for you to edit your work, take no prisoners. We did a Lulu University episode where we recommend, you know, we go over these tips and we recommended pretending like your worst enemy is reading your manuscript. So they obviously wouldn't be going through it with any rose-colored goggles. They would be pretty ruthless. So it's helpful to kind of think about that mindset. Again, just changing the way you're looking at it so you can take a step back, embody your nemesis. Obviously, none of us have any enemies, but pretend like you do. Embody them, and then identify what's working and what isn't. And again, just a reminder, just because you cut something out or a character or a plot line, it does not mean you can't use it somewhere else. So the last tip that I have for you today for self-editing is use an editing software for spelling and grammar mistakes. We mere mortals can only do so much. So there's a ton of great programs out there that can help you harness the power of technology and AI to help you highlight and cut out any spelling or grammar mistakes, or even identify over usages of phrase or terms and the difficulty level your text is at, and if it's appropriate for your intended audience. So a few of the usual suspects here are Pro Writing Aid. We did a webinar with them if you'd like to learn more. That's on our YouTube channel. Also, Grammarly and Hemingway Editor are great products to use. They can kind of just help you level up and sharpen the text before you move on to these other levels of editing that we're going to go on to in just a second. And many of these have free trials, so you can test them out before you commit. So this is really quick and dirty, 6 tips for self-editing. Again, we have a Lulu U on this as well. If you are interested in expanding or learning more about self-editing, have blogs that support this, this as well. So definitely check those out. And we're gonna move along now.
Okay, I'm gonna take it over from here. Thank you, Chelsea. So I'm going to talk to you about the next step that comes after you are so sick of self-editing that you can't even look at that Word doc anymore without wanting to throw your laptop into the dumpster, which is absolutely what this GIF is not doing on this slide at this moment, but it's supposed to be. So once you've reached that point where you are just totally done, you can't look at it anymore, you need other people to help you out, which is great. You get to bring other people into your formerly very insular individual writing process. But you don't necessarily want to hire a professional editor right away here. You might want to get some free help first. So let's talk about the intermediary stage between self-editing your book and hiring a professional, and those are beta readers. So Anna Marie, if you could go to the next slide. All right, so what is a beta reader? If you're not familiar, beta readers are people from your ideal audience, preferably, but they don't have to be, who will read your book before you publish it. They're not editors, not in the way that we're going to talk about in a little bit, but they can act as editors and offer feedback on characters, plot, story flow, and content organization. So in other words, a beta reader is like a beta tester. They are the trial reader or consumer for your book. They're going to sample your new product as a familiar but unbiased consumer and help you identify any weak spots that you might have, just like a beta tester would. So, you know, beta readers are great because they can kind of be whatever you need them to be. If you're writing fiction, you're hoping for somebody to read through your novel and tell you if there are any glaring plot holes or any characters that they don't like, or you know, scenes they find confusing, they can do that for you. If you're writing nonfiction and you're writing something educational, you're looking for a layman to read through your intro level book and see if it makes sense to them, or if there's any glaring gaps in the data, a beta reader can do that for you. They can also be great for just, you know, making sure that you're not alone in the fortress of solitude that is writing, which is going to be one of the things we talk about on the next slide. So if we can go ahead, thank you. So how do you find a beta reader? Well, that's a great example. What Robert just said in the chat, my wife reads each chapter after I finish writing it. Your wife is a great beta reader. That's very kind of her to do that. That's the great thing about an informal editor like a beta reader. Technically, anybody can be one. And depending on what kind of feedback you're looking for from your beta readers, all different kinds of people in your life might serve as a different reader and serve a different purpose in reading your book. So of course, family, friends, coworkers, or other professionals that you've worked with in your industry, anyone you know, friends of a friend even, can be great sources for an informal beta reader. I'm also personally a big advocate for writing partners or writing groups to stay connected with you while you're working on a book. As I've mentioned, writing, you know, we all know if we've done it, can be a very insular and lonely activity. You're spending an overwhelming amount of time alone with your own words and your own thoughts, staring at this Word doc or notebook, whatever your writing style is. And it's nice to have a support system that you can kind of lean on to help you navigate some of those negative impacts of all that solitude. You know, there's different ways that everybody can go around doing this. I'm personally not a fan of big groups, although they can be very useful. I'm in a couple of different Facebook writing groups that are, you know, different groups that I've found from grad school or podcast fans even, or whatever, that have spin-off groups of writers. They can be great for kind of lurking in if you're like me and you don't want to talk so much, but you want to see what everybody else is talking about and get some information that way. There's also places like Discord servers or online chat rooms for smaller, more active writing groups. And then, of course, there's organizations like NaNoWriMo that are fostering these major online writing communities and have all kinds of different ways that you can build your network like that. And then, when we're in non-pandemic times, hopefully soon, you can always check your local library or indie bookstore for any writing groups that meet there. Chances are good you'll find at least one. And they don't have to necessarily be writers that are working in your genre, whether you're looking for a writing group or an individual writing partner. Sometimes it can be even better to be working with people that are not writing in your genre, because then you're not, you're getting some outside input and some outside perspectives, which can be great. Anyway, the whole point of writing groups is that they can be great to find a beta reader. In this case, either you can ask if anyone has worked with one before that they would recommend, or that somebody in the group themselves might be willing to work with you, especially because there are going to be some like-minded but impartial readers that will probably be happy to volunteer if it means that you'll return the favor. You can, of course, hire a beta reader if you would prefer that route. There are great resources online for finding beta readers for hire. You can check out freelancer contracting platforms like Fiverr. And if you do plan to go this route, just don't forget to include beta readers in your budget planning. They will not be as expensive as professional editors, but you do possibly need more than them. I would recommend 3 to 5 beta readers as a good, comfortable spot. You don't want too many people. You know what they say about too many cooks, but you do want more than one. So, okay, now that I've totally convinced you that you need beta readers, let's talk about how to work with one. So I've put together a couple of tips for working with a beta reader. Keep these in mind when whether you're hiring somebody or just asking somebody as a friend or coworker or whatever to help you out. So a couple tips. Number 1, establish a workflow ahead of time. A workflow that's going to suit you both, preferably. Are you going to send your beta reader your whole manuscript when the whole thing is finished all at once? Or are you going to send them 50 pages at a time, or section by section, or a certain chunk of chapters? Definitely a good way to do that is to have a conversation ahead of time. And also make sure you establish a deadline. Do you need your manuscript edits back by a certain date in order to stick to your publishing timeline? Or are you more flexible with that? Make sure that you work out those details with your beta reader, so you're not saying to them, hey, by the way, I need that back by Friday and it's Wednesday. You've got time to read 250 pages before Friday, right? Definitely establish that workflow ahead of time. Tip number 2, establish what kind of feedback you're looking for. So in my other life, before I was a social media manager, I also worked in publishing, and I went to grad school for writing, and I've done a lot of beta reading in my time. So I've kind of established a short list of questions that I ask any writer that asks me to do beta reading for them. So I thought I would share those with you. Of course, your beta reader might have their own list of questions if they're familiar with this, if they've done this before. But it never hurts to be proactive and give them some outlines and specifics on what you're hoping to get out of their beta reading. So what I usually ask is, 1, do you want inline comments and feedback, or would you prefer an overall general response at the end of my read through? 2, I ask them, do you want any copy edits, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but basically pointing out typos, grammar errors, maybe things you could do to tighten up the sentence, or are you not there yet and you're just looking for general content feedback? And number 3, do you have any specific details or questions that you want me to pay attention to within your draft? So you don't have to get wildly specific about your feedback requests if you don't want to, but it can be a good idea to get at least a general idea of what you're looking for and give your beta reader a general idea of what you're looking for. If you've ever worked with an editor of any kind before, it can be a huge bummer to get irrelevant feedback. It's not helpful to you, and it kind of feels like you wasted your friend or editor's time. So you want to make sure that you and your beta readers are getting the most out of this review and using your time productively. Another great tip is to keep in mind that it can be a good idea to ask different beta readers to read for different things. So you're not getting all your feedback from one person, but maybe you're asking one person to focus on the plot, and one person to focus on characters, and one person to focus on the chapter organization. Just kind of spreading that out a little bit. Tip number 3, find ways to reciprocate. Unless you're paying for a beta reader, chances are pretty good that your volunteer beta reader is offering to do this out of the goodness of their heart. And if they're a writer, the hope that someday you'll return the favor and read their manuscript for them. On the bright side, things to think about: reading, especially critical reading that you would do as a beta reader, is a fantastic way to both improve your own writing craft and self-edit yourself. It'll give you an opportunity to take a look at what does and doesn't work in somebody else's manuscript, may inspire some edits or fixes in your own draft that you might not even have realized were a problem. And it'll give you a good idea of what you were looking for out of a beta reader, what may have been helpful for you that you didn't ask for the first time around, etc. And you know what they say, the best way to learn is to do it yourself. So if we can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. One last thing I wanted to touch on about beta readers before we move on to professional editors. There is a subset of beta readers that have gotten more popular in the last few years, and those are sensitivity readers. Like beta readers, they are not professional editors that are going to help with details like plot structure or content outline, but they're here to focus on one specific part of your book. And that is that they're here to look for representation issues like unconscious bias, stereotypes, cultural inaccuracies, or problematic language. And they can be extremely helpful for both fiction and nonfiction writers. A sensitivity reader can lend accuracy and authenticity to your manuscript the same way any other authority might. If you're writing a novel about hockey and you don't know anything about the game, you're not just going to make it up, right? You're going to do some research, ideally, but it would be even better if you could find a beta reader or a friend who plays hockey or knows hockey and could tell you, like, yeah, you got this right, or nah, you called it a ball and it's a puck. It's the same idea that a sensitivity reader can do the same thing, just with representation and language. And of course, again, this can be great for fiction and nonfiction. Let's say you're working on a guided journal for self-care and personal growth. A sensitivity reader would be a great person for you to work with, especially one that focuses on mental health and wellness. They'd be a great addition to your editing team. They can point out things like potential triggers or ableist language that you might not have noticed yourself or been aware of yourself. And this is something that has come up recently in publishing, but they are definitely not new to the publishing landscape. So you will definitely be able to find professional sensitivity readers if you are looking for them. The same places that you would look for a beta reader or any other kind of professional editor, which we will talk about now. All right, thank you, Anna. So once you've exhausted your self-editing abilities and your beta reader feedback, now you have finally gotten to the point where you can go pro and hire an editor. So at this point in the presentation, this is the part that our good friend Paul was supposed to do. So he has written me a script and put together these slides, and I'm going to do the best that I can to share them with you as knowledgeably and authentically as he would have. But if you have any questions about any of the details that we share here, he's definitely done a lot more in-depth research on this than I have, and has put together several really great blog posts that I will be happy to share with y'all at the end. Check out blog.lulu.com. You'll see some recent posts. Again, I'll post the links at the end of this. But I would recommend 2 in particular that are editing costs and budget, which was posted in April. It'll be a great breakdown of what a professional editor will cost at different levels. And then there's also one that Chelsea wrote also posted in April called Don't Sweat It, Edit, that is a deep dive into the different types of editors, which we are going to talk about now. So, sorry, let me catch up to myself here. I'm going to assume for just the purposes of this conversation that I have already convinced you that you need to hire an editor. Just in case I need to convince you a little more, an editor is probably the most important part of your writing process. You are investing a lot of energy and time and creativity into this book, and you want to make sure that you are getting the most out of that investment. And an editor is going to be able to help you do that. So if you're on the fence about whether or not you need to hire a professional editor of any kind, let me be the first, and certainly not the last, to tell you that it is absolutely worth the budget. So let's take a look at what different types of editors we need, because as you may or may not know, there are actually a lot of different types of editors. It's not just one person that's editing all of the different details of your manuscript. There are at least 4 different types of editors that you could potentially work with. So let's take a look at those. There's going to be developmental editors who will help you refine your story and finesse both the plot and characters. Line editors who will work line by line to correct and improve sentence structure. Copy editors who are similar to line editors, but will work much more on the grammar, punctuation, and word usage in your manuscript. And then proofreaders who are kind of acting like an overall check on all of the above. So we're going to go ahead and take a deeper look at all 4 of those, starting with developmental editors. So just quickly, I'm going to mention these in the order that it would be best to have them work on your manuscript, which does not necessarily mean this is the priority order for who you have to hire, or who we would encourage you to hire. We'll talk about that once we've gone through all of these. But let's say you were, unlimited budget and you were going to hire all 4 of these different types of editors. This is the order in which you would want them to work on your book. So first up, developmental editors. Maybe the most fun editing role, according to Paul's script, which I completely agree with. Developmental editors can take your manuscript and help you focus the plot. And we're kind of using the word plot broadly here, but just rest assured, whether you're writing fiction or nonfiction, a developmental editor can be equally relevant to you. For example, even if you're writing a nonfiction book, even if you're writing just a basic educational manual, you're still kind of telling a story. You still want to present information to people in a logical order, in a way that makes sense, making sure that there's everything that they need is included in the story of your book, and so on. So if you're writing nonfiction, don't be like, oh, well, I don't need this. It's absolutely worth considering. So anyway, developmental editors. You can hire a developmental editor kind of at any point during your editing process. You may want to work with them while you're in the process of drafting your book. You may want to work with them once you have the book fully finished. So that's a thing to consider when you're looking for editors, is look for their particular process and when they might want to join you on your publishing journey. Other things that you may want to look for when you are looking for a developmental editor: somebody that's going to take a look at the big picture view of your plot, somebody that is going to see the forest and the trees, maybe. And also somebody that is going to help you organize the scenes and chapters in your narrative to make sure it creates a cohesive story, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. Of course, something to keep in mind, a developmental editor might be the most fun editor to work with, but it's also going to be the one that gives you the most work to do. So make sure that when you're planning out your publishing timeline and you're giving some consideration to a developmental editor, that you're planning for some pretty substantial rewrites. There's a very strong possibility you'll be doing some pretty substantial rewrites. So I'd give yourself a good amount of time to work with a developmental editor. Paul recommends about 3 months, I think he said. So because of the amount of work that you're going to do with an editor, the cost of what they're going to charge is going to vary dramatically depending on the amount of work and the size of your book. But you could expect to pay somewhere between $500 and $3,000 for a developmental editor. And again, like I mentioned earlier, if you want to take a deeper look at the costs associated with professional editing, I would definitely recommend the blog posts editing costs and budget at blog.lulu.com. I will share that link in the chat at the end of this. Okay, so let's take a look at line editors. Thank you. So a line editor is somewhere in between a copy editor and a developmental editor. The big difference between a line editor and a copy editor, we'll talk about a copy editor in a minute. The line editor is gonna tinker with your sentence structure, not your overall plot, but they're gonna do so in a way that doesn't change your voice and doesn't change the style that you've written your book in. They're gonna work to tighten your voice, maybe to make it more streamlined, to make it flow better, but they're not going to try to change or edit it. Line editors can be expensive. It's not an easy job. They are both trying to fine-tune your details in many different ways and match your voice. So you may find yourself paying anywhere between $500 and $2,000 for a line editor. So when you are looking for a line editor, if you decide that is somebody that you want, look for somebody that has a very good attention to detail and is skilled in grammar, spelling, and style rules. Next up is a copy editor. So a copy editor is probably the most important editor. If you are only going to hire one of these 4 types of editors, I would say go with a copy editor. And a lot of my editorial friends would probably yell at me for saying that because they think they're the most important as developmental editors, but they are wrong. Copy editor is one of the most valuable tools in your author toolkit, mostly because a copy editor is a cold, unbiased grammar ninja who is going to make your manuscript the best it can be. So if you're on a tight budget, definitely consider these guys. A copy editor will prune your sentences, correct your grammar, and ensure consistency in your language and tone. They're going to make sure that your book looks and sounds professional. So here's what you should look for in a copy editor. You're going to look for somebody that is, see if I can say this word, a skilled grammarian. Paul wrote this again, thanks Paul. An editor that is comfortable with your preferred writing style, and look for somebody who is knowledgeable about consistency and fact checking and will pay attention to the details in your writing. And as for what you will pay for a copy editor, you should expect to pay somewhere between $200 and $1,400, depending on the size of your manuscript. Last but not least, we have a proofreader. So a proofreader is a lot like a beta reader, except they are going to be the very last person that reads your book after you've done the line edits and the copy edits and the potential developmental edits and all of that. Because of that, you might not have to pay for a proofreader. You might be able to approach it the same way that you would a beta reader. You can have a friend, family member, peer editor, a fellow writer do your proofreading for you. I would just recommend that if you are going to outsource to a friend or family or somebody, look for somebody that you did not previously use as a beta reader. You want a fresh set of eyes on your book as a proofreader. But of course, if you decide to hire somebody, if your budget allows and you have the option to hire somebody, Hiring a professional proofreader can be a great way to catch any remaining typographical errors in your book. Hopefully there won't be any if you've done a good job with your copy editor, but it's always good to double check. And then they'll also offer a fresh perspective on your story, which is always worthwhile. If you are hiring a proofreader, you can expect to pay anywhere from $100 to, okay, well, Paul says $100 to $8,000 here, which does sound like a lot, but probably on the less expensive end, although of course that will vary based on the size of your book. So anyway, now that we know who the different editors are, let's take a look at the next slide. You may be asking yourself now, you may not, you may know exactly who you'd want to work with and who you wouldn't, but you may be asking yourself right now, how do I decide which type of editor I need, if I need any of them at all? So Paul's put these questions together for you that I think are really great questions. After you've done with you've done your self-editing and had some beta readers, had some time with their feedback, had anybody other than yourself look at your book, ask yourself these 3 questions. Did your readers understand the narrative? Is your copy tightly written and clean? And do you want to sell your book? Depending on how you answered these, you are probably in a good place to hire some professional help. So if we can go ahead to the next slide, here is a quick cheat sheet to see how your answers might influence your editorial hires. So you guys will get a copy of all these slides that will record this webinar for you. So if you don't get a chance to screenshot this, don't worry about it. But I would also maybe recommend screenshotting this because it is a really good cheat sheet here. So once you've decided and figured out what exactly you're looking for in an editor and who you need to hire, now, of course, the last question is, how do you hire an editor? But don't worry, we got you there. So if you could go to the next slide, Anna. This is a GIF that I don't think is going to work, which is too bad because it's a really cool GIF. This is our Hire a Pro page on lulu.com/partners. It is an extensive list of publishing professionals that we highly recommend for all sorts of things, including editorial services and all different types of editorial services. So I would definitely recommend checking out this page if you're looking for where to start with finding an editor. You can also check out the Editorial Freelancers Association. They have a fantastic list of resources on their website, which you can find on this partners page, or you can go to the-efa.org to check them out there as well. And that, I think, is the end of what I have for you. So I definitely see we have some questions in the chat here. I'm gonna just give me a second and I will take a look and see if there's anything here that I can help you out with. And let me get those links for you quickly for the blog posts I recommended. So that's editing costs and budget is the one that will dig a deeper dive into editing costs and budget. And then this second one, Don't Sweat It, Edit, is a deeper look at the different types of editors that you could potentially work with. Okay, let me see your questions. Okay, so Angela asked, what are some ways to protect your work during the beta stage? Honestly, that's kind of a risk that you have to take. I would recommend not working with any beta reader or potential editor that you are afraid is going to try to steal your work from you in any way. It's very hard to work with anybody that you don't trust. There isn't really any safeguards in place that are going to protect your work for you. So it's just going to be a matter of you making sure that you find a beta reader that you are comfortable with and that you trust. Okay, Alex asked a question. Working on releasing a second edition to my first nonfiction book. Does that get uploaded as a revision or a new project? I would upload that as a new project, Alex, because you are going to need a new ISBN for it. So if you are changing anything about the content of the book, you're going to need a new ISBN for that and identifying it as a new book. So I would go ahead and update or upload that as a new project. Let's see. Yes, somebody asked in here if the slides will be available after the webinar. Yes, you will get a recording of this whole presentation. We'll also put it up on YouTube on our website. So you'll have access to all of this information after this recording is over. Okay, Camille asked, should editors be familiar with or enjoy subject matter? That's a great question. You will definitely, you will find a variety of different types of editors based on how they advertise themselves. I would strongly recommend working with one who is familiar with the genre that you're writing in or the subject matter that you're writing in, especially your example of children's books, especially if you're writing about children's books or you're writing a children's book. You will want to look for children's book specific editors. Most editors will advertise, when you're looking at hiring them, what genres, book formats, age ranges, etc., they are comfortable with working in. But yeah, you definitely want to work with somebody. You always want to work with somebody who is familiar with what it is you're writing. Just always going to go better for everybody involved and more fun for everybody involved. Sorry, I'm just catching up now with a couple more questions. Misha, I see your question about the Canva cover tool with Lulu. I'm sorry to say that I don't know a whole lot about how that integration works, other than having used it myself several times. You should be able to get a template that includes the correct sizes for your exact book. It should pop up when you in the publishing tool. There should be an option to download the exact cover size template for your book, and then you can upload that directly into Canva when you're using the Canva cover tool. Let's see. Angela, will there be a webinar regarding the publication process through Lulu? That is a great question. We're always looking for new ideas for webinars, so that's definitely something we can consider. There is also a really great tutorial video that we've posted. It's not a full-length webinar, but it is just a quick, screen share tutorial of how to publish your book using Lulu. If you check us out on YouTube, I would recommend looking at all of those different tutorials on there. There are some really helpful ones there. Francis, if I change the title of my book, if you're changing the title of your book, that is a new edition of the book. So yes. Oh, galley copies. Alex asked, can you talk about galley copies? I can actually talk quite a bit about galley copies, and specifically the fact that there are different kinds of them. So I'm not sure which version you mean here. So there are, in traditional publishing, a galley copy is the very, very first review copy that you're going to see. It's the first, most basic bound manuscript. There's no formatting done to the book. It's probably full of typos and errors. If there's any graphics or anything in that book, they won't be included in the galley copy. They are basically what Paul referred to and Chelsea referred to as editing editions for authors, where they are just the basic version. If you want to see a printed out version of your book, that's what a galley copy is going to be. They can also be used for super early reviews if you're reaching out to anybody for super early reviews. But realistically, on a self-publishing timeline, I wouldn't encourage that. The more popular version and the more polished version is an advanced review copy, also known as an ARC. Those are going to be review copies that are more polished. They may still have some errors. You may not have had a copy editor or a line editor go through. You might not have all the graphics in place yet, but they will be much more polished versions. They will usually be cheaper versions as well. So, if you're printing a nice hardcover with a color interior, your galley copy or your ARC would be a paperback in black and white. It's mostly just to get review copies of the book that you can share. Maybe you want to share that with a beta reader or with your proofreader, or again, for earlier review copies. I don't know if that answered your question, but I can keep talking about galley copies all day, so I figured I'd stop eventually. Trinity, how is Lulu different from other platforms such as Amazon in terms of self-publishing? We could do an entire 1-hour webinar about that. In fact, we have. So I would recommend checking out, let's see, which one of our webinars? Probably, how do you know which publisher is right for you? If you visit us on YouTube, if you go to YouTube and look up Lulu University, you'll find a lot about that. You can also find some comparisons on a breakdown about the different things that you can do with Lulu versus other platforms on our website. Latrice, yes, we do have a webinar on how to format a book. It is called Fun with Formatting, and it's actually, in my opinion, it's super useful. Every book that I've made using Lulu, I have watched that webinar while doing the formatting on it. You can find that on YouTube as well, Fun with Formatting. Wendy, what is the best way to communicate edit changes between editors and writers? That is a process that you will work out with your editor. Everybody has their own different styles. Some people like to do comments in the margins on whatever Word doc or Google Doc they're using. Some people do cover letters. Some people do, a bullet list, whatever. That's a great question to ask your editor when you're looking at hiring them. I'm sure they'll have a system in place already. Edward, if you're having issues with getting payment options on Lulu, please reach out to our support team. That is not something that I have any access to as a social media manager. So please go to help.lulu.com to contact our support team. And okay, sorry, I'm just scrolling through real quick, trying to get any more questions. We're running low on time here, but I do want to make sure that there any more that I missed. Kathleen said, does an ARC copy require an ISBN? No, you only need an ISBN for a book that you are distributing for sale. If you are just ordering some review copies for yourself or for individual reviewers, you do not need an ISBN for it. And Jan, if you want to order 300 to 500 copies, Lulu is definitely the way to go. We actually have bulk orders available. So if you go to our website, sorry, I used to know this URL. I think it might just be lulu.com/bulk. Actually, you can learn more about how to place a bulk order with us. I'm sorry, it's lulu.com/pricing volume or pricing/volume discounts. And I think that is just about it for us. We are getting in at 1 o'clock, and I do want to be conscientious of everybody's time. Again, if you have questions, you can always reach out to us by reaching out to our support team. You can reach out to us on social media. I will be happy to answer you or connect you with our support team if you have more questions. Thank you for joining us today. It was great to get to talk to everybody, and I hope we see you all again soon for our next webinar. Have a great rest of your afternoon and a great rest of your week.